As fantastic a CFP as Mel O is, as wonderful an attorney as I am, and as good as Stormy is at whatever it is he does, please do note that anything said in our podcasts are our opinions alone and are not meant to be taken as financial or legal advice.
Welcome to Finances, the Other F Word, a Gen Xer podcast for musicians and music lovers, where we discuss money and music without all the pretentious bullshit. Here are your hosts, Zoe Terry, attorney at large, Stormy Andrews, founder of Yokel Local Marketing, and Mel O, certified financial planner and author of Finances, the Other F Word. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey guys, welcome back to Finances, the Other F Word. Today on the episode, we're going to talk about a really not fun topic. We're going to try to explain from all three of our different viewpoints what the fuck happened in 2008. For those of you who lived through 2008, first of all, it hit the Gen Xer generation the hardest. Millennials had the ability to stay in college in the event that they couldn't find work and they could, get a different degree or something of that nature. For a lot of the baby boomers, they still were able to keep a lot of their pensions intact. Actually, I talked about this on Stormy's other podcast, Bizruptions, about how it actually hit the Gen Xer generation the most dire, because we were in the middle of having homes and careers and debt and kids and trying to save for kids' education and all this kind of stuff. And basically 2008 just completely wiped out the Gen Xers.
Yeah.
And on top of that, if you read any financial article, because I read a lot of them, they talk about boomers and they talk about millennials. And it's like the fucking Xers do not exist. Like this whole generation in the middle, we don't exist. We didn't get hit with anything because the boomers are still living so long and the millennials are coming up with all the technology. And for me, I know that I got caught right in the middle of technology because we didn't get our first computer in the classroom until 86, and we had Oregon Trail on it. And I was in 6th grade and kept dying of dysentery. Did you ever play Oregon Trail? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oregon Trail? I don't remember Oregon Trail. Was that on one of the early Apples, or was that a...
Was it an Apple we had? I don't know. It was that big 5 1/4 disc, and you had to, there was, the green black background on green lettering, and you had to go on a little wagon train, and you had to answer historical questions, and then if you missed enough questions, you died of dysentery. And I didn't know what dysentery was. Dysentery is diarrhea.
It's bad diarrhea.
You die of diarrhea, dysentery.
Yeah. Completely died. Yeah, and I saw a guy with the shirt of the little guy that said, "Remember, you died of dysentery." And I was like, I wanted to rip the shirt off of him and wear it. And so we got kind of caught as Xers. I think the reason why they forget about us so much is because we got caught in between, technology came for me. We got our first home computer, Commodore 64.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and that was a powerhouse.
Did you have one of those Oki data printers?
With
the dot matrix? Yes, absolutely.
You know what? I know we did.
The little holes on the side.
Oh, and you had to rip them down?
Data. Absolutely.
Was that what it was called? Because we did have one of those.
Yeah, that's an Oki data dot matrix printer.
And every time you picked up the phone, it would cut off, and then my dad would scream at me because he had just finally, after like 5 hours, gotten logged onto the internet, the interweb, if you will, and then I would pick up the phone to call a friend, and I was like hostage because we didn't have cell phones. You couldn't talk. You're a teenage girl, and I can't talk on the phone. This is bullshit, But and so we were kind of caught in the middle of it, and I remember in high school still learning to type on an electronic typewriter, not an actual typewriter, and it was called keyboarding is what I took, and it was crazy. And so a lot of times when we're talking, the Gen Xers were getting stuck because we don't have as much technology savvy because we didn't grow up with it as the millennials. Some of the millennials do, but we don't have the same, there's this thing where they say, oh, you're going to have your kids always end up having a better life than you with wealth and standard of living.
Right.
The Xers are the first generation, and everybody behind us that is not.
What?
Yeah.
The baby boomers had the best?
They were always a step up, but so the boomers gave birth to the Xers, and we will be the first generation to not have, supposedly by whatever criteria they do, the best standard of living.
Interesting.
After the baby boomers. So they forget about the Xers a lot, but the Xers were the hardest hit in 2008. And so I just want to highlight a couple of the devastation that happened in the market in 2008. And I want to talk about it in a way that hopefully is going to be easily to understand, because it was a shit show. It was just 2008 was horrible. And so there's a couple things that come to mind right off the bat. The first thing is, our housing market sank. And for Las Vegas in specific, we had a lot of people coming over from California buying houses.
Yep, we were at ground zero.
Ground zero. It's us, California, Florida, and Arizona.
I don't think Arizona, either pockets in Arizona they got hit, but it was really us and Florida, and then parts of California.
Yeah, I know. I thought there was 4 states that got it, but we got it. So people came over.
Right.
Yeah, bought rental houses that were still cheaper than buying a primary residence in California at the time, and then basically walked away from them. So they did a couple things that were pretty substantial. In 2009, so there's this thing called short selling. Short selling is basically where you bet against a stock. So if you want to buy MGM stock and you buy it at $15, but you think it's going to go down to $10, then you're betting against the stock, so you short sell it. And there's a way that you can look to see how many contracts, basically how many people are betting against the stock market or betting against a specific stock. So for mortgage companies and a whole bunch of banks, there was a lot of people short selling their stocks that was bringing the stock market down. So when we closed out 2006, the S&P 500 had a return of about 15.61%. The market started trending down at the end of 2007, but we still managed to eke out a gain of 5.48%. By December 31st of 2008, we were negative 36.5%, which means that basically we had lost 41%. But at one time in 2008, we were actually down almost 60% in the S&P 500, and then we had rebounded slightly. And that is the year that I started drinking whiskey. And that is the honest to God truth. I was sitting in my little cubicle and my whole fucking screen was red and everything was dropping. Things that weren't supposed to drop were dropping. And I looked at the mortgage rep next to me and I said, that's it. I'm going to go get a whiskey. Fuck this. It was like 11:30. I shut my laptop and he said, me too. He couldn't do any business. And we went to a bar and we sat there for the next 7 hours and I just tried whiskey after whiskey and I've never gotten off of it. Jack Daniel's Single Barrels for listeners who want to do something nice for me, hook me up. So they banned short selling because they were trying to stop the fact that that people were betting against the market and it was actually pushing the market down farther. We had a big deal in money markets that is often overlooked. So a lot of times people will talk about money markets and for some reason they think that a money market is a savings account. A money market is not FDIC insured, and how it works is that if you have $10,000 in a money market account, you own 10,000 shares of the money market account at $1 each. And it typically was, it's comprised of short-term notes that would pay you higher yield. And so if you put your money into a money market account, you would actually get a higher return than a savings account. And you, up until 2008, you never had your shares go less than $1. Well, in 2008, when all fucking hell was breaking loose, we had, I think, 10 money markets break the buck, meaning that you had your money in a cash equivalent and you actually lost money. So it would be like having your money in a savings account and then having less money when you go in to take it out. And that was a huge, huge deal. And then we had preferred. So we have common stock and we have preferred stock. Common stock, you typically buy for growth. Preferred stock doesn't really grow very much. It stays within a tight range, but you get a higher yield. And the people that invest in preferred stocks are typically more conservative investors. We had companies coming out in 2008 with preferred saying we're no longer paying our dividend. And it sent the market into a chaos because it's like having a car with no engine. There's no fucking point in owning the stock. And a lot of these people who had preferred stocks were older people and started freaking out. So all of these conservative alternatives with money market accounts and preferred stocks just kind of started imploding. And then we had a whole bunch of banks that almost went under. Lehman Brothers did go under. They were not an FDIC insured bank. And they were a private bank, and there was a couple last-ditch efforts to save them. They had a fuck ton of money, and they ended up falling through at the last minute, and Lehman Brothers went under. They laid off like 5,000 people in London and then, kind of circled the wagons in New York, but they completely lost their ass. AIG got bailed out Bank of America snatched up Merrill Lynch and saved their ass. And Bear Stearns, there was a whole bunch of these really big banks. And the reason why specifically AIG had an issue is because of something called credit default swaps. And so a credit default swap in my world is basically if you buy a bond, somebody else gives you insurance that if the bond doesn't pay you the money it's supposed to, they're going to cover it for you. Well, then what happened is when the market exploded, nobody had any money and nobody could cover anybody. And then the whole credit default swap market killed it. And the reason for that is because of the subprime lending. And so when you have a mortgage back in the day in 2007 and 8, you could have prime mortgages, which means, hey, show me your income, show me your your taxes, your credit, work history, this is how much it is. Show me you can pay for this house. Then they switched to subprime, which was basically like, oh, we just think that this house is going to keep going up. So we don't even care if you have job history, and we don't really even care how good your credit is, because we're banking not on you, but on the fact that this house is going to continue to grow in value. And so that split off into prime and subprime. And the way the subprime mortgages were linked to Wall Street is because what would happen is that these smaller mortgage institutions would lend to subprime people, basically with no criteria, no credit, no income. They would lend money out, and then they'd let these people get houses. And then they would take all of those mortgages, and then they would wrap them up into a mutual fund. So there'd be like a ball of just all of these subprime mortgages, and then they'd slap a really well-graded name on it, like Merrill Lynch. So Merrill Lynch would have a mortgage mutual fund or mortgage-backed securities, and they'd ball them all up and they'd slap their name on it. And people would say, oh my God, Merrill Lynch, they've been around forever. They have great history, great ratings. We're totally buying this. Not realizing that the mortgages that made up that was all shit. So Merrill Lynch might have had a good name, but all of the mortgages that were the actual structure of the fund was complete crap. And what ended up happening is that the people who had subprime mortgages walked from their secondary homes first that they bought to flip, then their secondary vacation homes, and then their primary residence. And so what happened is all these stockholders who own these mortgage-backed securities are now losing their ass, and depending on how it's structured, they might not have even been able to get out of it. And so what you had a massive hysteria. We had City Center in Las Vegas was in the middle of being built. Right. And it almost went bankrupt.
Absolutely.
Completely bankrupt in the middle of being built. We had so many high rises on the Strip, Fontainebleau, and a whole bunch of big things just stopped, just all of a sudden stopped. At one point in my neighborhood, there was 15 to 20 for sale signs, and my neighborhood is not that big. And what it did was it just all kind of started compounding on itself, and then we just started our descent into 2008. And the memory that stands out the most for me is the first time that Congress tried to pass the TARP bailout. They didn't pass it, and I watched. I think that was Whiskey Day. Actually, I'm gonna crown that as my anniversary of whiskey. I watched the Dow drop over 1,000 points, which was about 12%, within a matter of probably 20 minutes, and that's when I packed up and left. Now I know that for you, Stormy, you were on the builder's side. And I'd be interested to hear your perspective, because the mortgage and the builders and the stock market, we were all intertwined, so close to each other.
So yeah, it was pretty wild. I mean, it was crazy. So up until that point, up until that time frame, I was the director of sales and marketing for a home builder. I also oversaw our mortgage division. We had a joint venture with Countrywide, so I was kind of intertwined with a lot of the stuff that was happening. So before the market started crashing, as a builder, we were building 200, 300, 400 homes a year consistently, year over year, making all kinds of money. Life is awesome. I was that Gen Xer that I'm a big baller, shot caller, that type of thing was happening, right? Well, then it came crashing down, and it came crashing down pretty darn fast. I made some good moves. I made some bad moves, but I remember looking at what was happening, and I'm like, wow, we're going to end up in this crash. Prior to that time, we just built our dream house, this 5,500 square foot home, and I'm thinking we got to get out of this thing, because it's who knows what it's going to be worth. So fortunately, we were able to sell it. I had this grand plan of we're going to sell this home.
No way. Stormy had a grand plan?
I had a grand plan. I'll let you know how that worked out. But I had this grand plan, right? Well, I made pretty good equity on the home. So I figured I can just sit out and I'll rent a home. So I went out and rented a home. And I'll get back to that story in just a moment, because when I was in the home building industry, what was happening was the value of the homes were depreciating faster than we could build and deliver the homes. So what would happen is part of my responsibility was to price our homes. So I would go out into the marketplace, look at what other similar size homes were selling for, look at what homes were closing for to determine what the value of our homes were, right? So let's say if I had a home and I'm like, okay, I think this home is worth $300,000. I would go look for homes that have closed at that similar price point at $300,000. And I would, and if I could make if I could justify the price point, I would say this is what we're going to sell our homes for. Well, I would go and set the price of the home at $300,000, and then the prices were moving so quickly in a downward trend that I would have to readjust the prices almost weekly. But it was interesting because we had investors in our projects, and these investors were these banks. So as the housing market was starting to get wanky and crazy and starting to collapse, the banks started receiving pressure from like the FDIC and other governmental agencies. So I would go that $300,000 home a couple of weeks later, maybe the value of that home is now $270,000. And I would gather all this documentation to show that the price of the home has dropped by $30,000, and I would need them to approve my new recommendation in terms of pricing. Make sense? Mm-hmm. So I would submit all the documentation that supports the pricing that I want. Well, the banks were terrified because they were getting crushed by the FDIC. They had to have particular cash reserves. So in order for them to make a decision, they would have to meet by committee, and it would take them 2-3 weeks to approve my $270,000 price point, right? Well, what do you think happened during those 2 or 3 weeks? They drop again. And it was just this thing that never ended. So when we sold a home, because we were damned if we damned if we didn't. Because if we didn't sell the home, we're paying interest on this empty house that's just sitting there in terms of construction loans. So it was something that we were doing our best to get out of these homes as quickly as possible. So let's say we entered into a contract at that home at $270,000, and now we're ready to sell the home. A month later, we had to finish up the construction, ready to close escrow. Well, maybe a month later, that home has dropped another $20,000 or $30,000. Well, now we had a choice. We either cancel the sale, or I would go to the owner and say, hey, we sold a home, and in order to close escrow, you need to write a check for $30,000.
And is the owner's a company because it's new construction, right?
It was new construction,
okay.
And we were a private builder, so our owner was a person.
Oh, wow.
So she was a person. I would go to her and I'm like, hey, we sold a home. The appraisal has come in at $243,000. These are first-time buyers, or they don't. These people aren't going to come in with the difference. So we either A, need to reduce the price, or give them their money back. What do you want to do? Well, she knew we had to get out of it, so she was writing checks for $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a pop just to get out of these homes. Because remember, her investors, which were the banks, they were too paralyzed to do anything. And we knew if we sat around another 2 weeks waiting for them, well, maybe we have to add another $10,000 to that check. So it was devastating. Now, here's the thing that was interesting. As a private builder, before things got too hairy, we were basically an acquisition target from all, and the company
because you guys are doing so well.
We were doing well. And the company that was going to buy us was Goldman Sachs. What do you think about that? An investment bank. They were like, hey, we're going to get the home building industry. And prior to us closing the deal, there was negotiations. All this stuff was happening behind the scenes. There was NDAs. You couldn't say anything. Well, in October, we were supposed to close this transaction sometime towards the end of the year. And this was 2008, I believe.
Of the acquisition, where they were going to take us over. Well, then in October of that year, maybe 3-4 weeks prior to the closing of Goldman Sachs taking us over, that's when the shit hit the fan with Lehman Brothers, Solomon, and everyone was running from these investment bankers. So Goldman Sachs, they had to pull things in because they didn't know if they were going to be a viable option moving forward. So that kind of killed that deal. When that deal was killed, the owner of our company said, we've got to close our doors.
So that was pretty interesting what was happening there. Now, let me just kind of go back to my scenario, which is kind of interesting because remember I told you I sold my home and I think I'm living large and I'm going to rent a home and I'm going to buy a home at the bottom of the market. Well, that didn't work out. So the first home we went to to rent, we rent the home and we had young kids at home in grade school and homes were going into foreclosure left and right. So the first home we go to rent, that home ends up in foreclosure.
How soon after you rented it?
Oh, like within a month.
Oh, God.
So it goes into foreclosure. And this, some of the early investors looking to get some of the deals were buying too early because things dropped a hell of a lot more. But they're like, ooh, this home dropped $100,000. I'll jump into it now. But we get a phone call from our kids saying some people are trying to break into the home. They wanted to break into the home to see what was happening in there because it was like a frenzy. So my wife's like, we're out.
Right.
We're leaving this house. And I'm like, yeah, but it's in foreclosure. Maybe I can work out a better deal. She's like, nope, we're leaving. So we go to rent another home. We go to rent the other home. And prior to us completing that transaction, that one goes into foreclosure. Oh, no. So then I find another home for us to rent. We rent that one. And within being in that home within a month or two, that one goes into foreclosure.
Wow.
So now my wife gives me an ultimatum. She's like, dude, we're done with your little stupid grand plan. You're going to find me a house now, or you can continue with your grand plan without me. I'm dead serious. Can you believe it? She's messing up my plan. But
I'm surprised you guys are still together, actually.
So
I'm surprised she doesn't. That's not her wake-up conversation with you every morning.
So it's funny. I went and found a house. This is how things were happening. I went and found a house. We're still in that house today. I went and found a house that had dropped like 40%. All right. I'm like, okay, it dropped 40%. I should be okay. I found this 3,000 square foot home. I ended up buying it, and it continued to drop, where that thing went down 60%, even after we moved in. So I bought the home, and by the way, I found the home, bought the home, closed escrow within 30 days. I mean, it was a super fast transaction.
That's amazing for then.
She was going to be out, and I decided, you know what, I kind of like her a little bit. So
I'll
keep her around.
And her little kids. I'll keep her little kids and me around.
Little kids.
And,
so generous of him. He's such a gentleman.
And, so we're still in the house today, but it continued to drop, and it just slid down, and it was pretty hectic, pretty crazy. But yeah, that was happening in the mortgage industry. And from the mortgage, in the home building industry. And what was happening then that was leading up to this, we would have investors, that would approach our communities during the heyday. And the investor would say, hey, I want to buy 5 houses. Will you sell me 5 of them? So we thought we were doing our due diligence. No, we're only selling to owner occupied. But they would get straw buyers. They would figure out ways to buy up a neighborhood. Fortunately, we did our due diligence where we didn't get struck the way some of these communities got hit, because some of the builders that didn't care, they would just sell it to anyone. When the housing market hit and they had these straw buyers and they would sell 20 homes to an investor, you had complete neighborhoods of 50, 60, 70, 100 homes where not a single person's living in the home. And then squatters just took over entire neighborhoods. It was crazy.
That sounds horrible. And I know that with a lot of the smaller mortgage companies and big banks are doing subprime too. So it's not the smaller mortgage ones. I mean, Wells Fargo had a subprime
absolutely
department, and and to their credit, because I worked for Wells Fargo Investments at the time, and to their credit, they did actually cancel their subprime department before shit really got bad. But I mean, they did definitely contribute, along with Chase and
all of them.
All of them, yeah. But the smaller mortgage companies would go ahead and lend. Oftentimes on the subprime, there would be closing costs up front, 1, 3, 4 points, whatever the case is. They'd get the thing done, and then because the mortgage company is too small to service it, they got their points up front. They would take the mortgage and they would shop. Countrywide was a huge buyer of these mortgages, which is why they ended up collapsing, and they got picked up by
Bank of America.
Yeah, I would say B of A, I think is, yeah. So B of A picked them up, and they would sell them to these bigger institutions. And so the bigger institutions were buying a lot of these subprime mortgages in the beginning. And then they thought, well, hell, we can do this ourselves. We'll get into the game. Well, by the time it was all done, they were so laden with these subprime mortgages that, depending on who you talk to in the investment world, they either intentionally misled investors.
Right.
Or, which I tend to think that that's probably more of what happened, or it just happens that these mortgages that they bundled up were subprime, and the banks, clearly had a clear conscience and had no idea that they would actually default.
Well, you know what? I'm going to jump back on that a little bit. I want to push back just a little bit, because I think, like, when I was in the home building industry, I thought I was a genius. I'm like, we're selling all these homes. I'm a genius, right? Well, I wasn't a genius. Any body sitting in my seat could have had the same, they would have thought they were a genius because it was just happening so easy. So I bet you a lot of these people within the banks, they saw what was happening, and they really gave themselves way too much credit.
Well, and I think that that's the case. I mean, we had tellers that left to go do, mortgage underwriting, and people who were cocktail waitresses going to do mortgage underwriting, but these are Wall Street people. These are, are mathematicians and economists and people who are way smarter than I am. And, unless somebody wasn't telling them, hey, these mortgages are shit mortgages, then you fucking know and you lied, or you were just really kept in the dark. And you were also bowled over by the fact that the ratings on these structures were high, because there's a rating system between Moody's and Standard & Poor's, and it'll let you know about, the different debt obligations and their rankings. And that's the reason why the credit default swaps was such a huge deal. Because, again, if I buy a mortgage-backed security, I buy it, and Stormy says, hey, I'm going to give you insurance on that. And I say, great, Stormy, I'm going to pay you, $500 or whatever. Okay. And then he says, okay, if, I'm just going to use Wells Fargo example because I used to work there. Wells Fargo doesn't pay you. Stormy is going to say, don't worry about it, Mel. I'm going to pay you what you should have gotten yield, okay, your interest, and I'm also going to make up the difference. And so I'm like, yeah, I mean, and Wells Fargo, you're thinking, hey, Wells Fargo or any of these other big institutions countrywide are never going to fail. Right. They're ranked so high. Yeah, hell yeah, I'm going to take your $500 because I know I'm never going to have to pay out. And again, conservative investors worked in the credit default swap. So you had, AIG, who was an insurance company, decided to get a little hot and bothered and run into that field. And so when the subprime mortgages started to fall out, the debt obligations, the bonds and stuff like that started to sink. And then the credit default swaps, people who sold them, they got called. I'm like, hey, Stormy, give me my money because they just went to you and they're not going to pay me. And Stormy's like, I don't got your fucking money. And maybe Stormy had money, but he didn't have money for everybody he had sold credit default swaps to. And AIG, is that exactly what happened? Is that they had sold so much credit default swaps out there that when people started trying to come to collect, they couldn't do it. And the reason why they saved AIG is because they didn't save a bank over in Britain, and I can't remember, but they didn't save them. So they decided we're going to go ahead and save AIG, and they bailed AIG out. And then that led to us bailing out a whole bunch of other banks and, and a whole bunch of backdoor mergers and that kind of stuff. When Wells Fargo bought Wachovia, literally, I think Chase or Citibank was talking. And like we had heard about, it was in the news Thursday, and then Friday it was announced that Wells Fargo bought Wachovia. They backdoored Citi or Chase, whoever it was, basically said, we're not even going to take government money, but we're going to totally jack this bank. And they bought them for pennies, which was a great business move. Right. But they backdoored it, and there was tons of that going on, and everybody was failing, and it was just like this fucking never-ending sinkhole. But I do think that you're right, that people assume that because they happen to hit something right at the right time, that they give themselves a little bit too much credit, that it's their genius. And it's not just the fact that you also have a little bit of luck. Right. And that was just so much like the little tip of the iceberg, because then on top of that, the federal government came in and started dropping interest rates. And when the Fed drops interest rates, they're trying to pump cash into the economy to keep it afloat, because their belief is that if we lower interest rates, more people are going to borrow money. Right. And so rates started dropping. Well, rates don't all control the credit, but they also control savings. So you have a market that's sinking. You have debt obligations, fixed income, that are typically more conservative and have higher yield, that are sinking. So normally people would have run from those and go to a savings account. But then the savings accounts aren't paying anything. Or actually they'd run from that to the money markets. Then the money markets broke the buck. So people bailed out into savings accounts. And then as they're dropping, unemployment is skyrocketing, and everything just kind of starts falling from there. So how about you, Zoe? What was your 2008 like?
It was a personal shit show. I'd been here, 2008, I'd been here a little less than 6 years, and I was going through a divorce, and I had 2 toddlers. And I think it was about then that I realized that having no credit was worse than having bad credit. And up until that point, I'd had no bills in my name. I didn't have a credit card. So when I got divorced and moved out of the house, I couldn't have bought a house if I'd have wanted to because I didn't have any credit. So I moved into a shithole of a rental that had scorpions. And it was one of the most miserable years of my life. But, so I was kind of not affected by the housing problem in that respect, in that I didn't own a home, and I didn't own a home until a couple of years ago, in fact. But, it was the realization, I guess, that, like I said, having no credit.
Did you try to get credit?
Yes, but I didn't. Immediately. But it still was some time before I was able to purchase a home. But I guess I wouldn't have been able to even if I wanted to. But yeah, it was that realization that I thought that was a good thing. I didn't have any debt. So surely that would mean I would be able to get a home.
So this is going to sound like a stupid question, but in Britain, is credit the same function as it is in our economy here?
Not to the same level. I mean,
so like what would you use credit for in like Britain? I mean, do you guys have a lot of credit card debt like most Americans carry, or is it primarily, home loans, or like what is it kind of like?
Yeah, I mean, we have credit cards and we have mortgages and things like that, but I don't think not having credit would penalize you like it does over here.
Right.
That would be seen as a good thing. She doesn't have any credit card debt. She doesn't. Right. Whereas over here, that's looked as, well, we can't verify that she's been paying on a debt. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's how it works, right? And of course, I had nothing. I didn't even have any bills in my name because they were all in my ex-husband's name. So I had pretty much nothing. No footprint, I guess. No. So it was just.
Were you still lawyering?
At that point, I was working part-time as a law clerk. But yeah, that's when I started studying for the bar that year too. And I think it was the next year that I passed the bar.
Well, see, and the thing that's so interesting about what you touch on is that when the Fed starts dropping interest rates, like I said, they're trying to pump more cash into the economy because they want people to lend more. But what ended up happening, and this pisses me off, and as you listen to this podcast, you're going to learn a couple things. I love the F word a lot. And in general, I don't think very favorably about my industry. Let's just put it out there. I don't fucking care. And that's not to say that there's not good people in the industry. I'm a good person. I have friends that are financial advisors that are good persons. I saw that, Zoe. I have friends that are financial advisors that are good people. But for, the most, I think they're greed pigs in my industry. And
what'd you call them?
Greed pigs.
What's a greed pig? I like that name.
Greed pig.
I think she just made that up, but I do kind of like it.
Of course, yeah. Greed pig. That we'll try to find a way to put that into every podcast somewhere. Absolutely. Like, how on the Playboy cover, they used to have they would put a Playboy little bunny somewhere on the cover and you'd have to find it. Am I the only one that knows what I'm talking about? Stormy, come on. I know you looked at Playboys when you were younger. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, he wasn't looking at the front cover, though, was he?
Yeah, I wasn't looking at the front cover.
Well, on the front cover
he wasn't
of Playboy,
trying to find the little bunny.
on the front cover of Playboy from at least the mid-'70s till, I don't know, maybe early 90s that I know, they had they'd have the model and then they'd have maybe a part of her hair would be twisted into a little Playboy bunny, and your whole point was to try to find
that was for old people.
Playboy bunny.
There wasn't a teenager on the planet looking for that.
I was. No. I could, dude, show me a Playboy from the late 70s to early 80s and I can find the Playboy bunny like that. Sometimes it was apparent, sometimes it wasn't. But so they're there, but what ended up happening was is that because you talked about construction loans being at high interest, do you happen to remember what any of the construction loans
were? Oh, they were horrendous because they were these short-term loans. Mm-hmm. They were all double digits. They were short-term. Yep. It was, from the time that we broke ground is when the construction loan would start with the expectation that we would be out of it in 90 days.
Right.
So we're probably talking teens, who knows? They could have, they were high.
Yeah, and a lot of,
who knows?
A lot of loans like that are the ones that made up money market funds. Short term, they're like right. 90 days or less. So right. They could be construction loans or they could be, other things. It depends on the money market. So when the Fed started, and this is one of the bullshit catch-22s of 2008, is when the Fed started pumping money into the system so that people would lend, so that would help us from going over the cliff in 2008. The banks were too terrified to lend, and so they wouldn't fucking lend to anybody.
Right.
So what ended up happening, and you touched on this with FDIC insurance, there is the Fed funds rate, which would be like basically in order to have for a bank to have FDIC insurance, you need to keep a certain amount of money on deposit. And that's driven by how much money is in your savings accounts and your CDs for your overall customers. And a lot of times, very often, banks are short to meet their overnight requirement. So, Chase might lend money to, I almost said Washington Mutual. Good Lord, they've been gone forever. See, 2008.
Chase bought Washington Mutual.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I mean, just the fact that I'm even thinking Washington Mutual, I'm like, I'm having flashbacks right now because 2008 was brutal for me. And I'll tell you my story. And what ended up happening was that, so this Bank A, lends overnight money to Bank B, and that's based on a Fed fund rate. And then from that, there's prime. And then prime is where, if it's, if they're lending you money, they're going to put prime plus money on top of it that you're going to have to pay. And if they're paying you money on a savings account or CD, it's going to be prime minus money that they're going to pay you. So basically, they double dip you on both sides. And so when the Fed lowered the interest rates to help out the banks so that the banks would lend, the banks didn't fucking lend. And so what ended up happening was all of these banks, greed pigs, all of them sitting on tons and tons and tons of money pumped in by the Fed's actions to try to get the economy kickstarted, and they sat on it. And what ended up happening was you had construction companies where they were trying to sell houses, right? And they can't make their payroll. Okay, because their houses aren't selling and they're, having to, do just whatever, cover all the expenses. They go to the bank and they say, hey, I'm short on payroll. Can I get a loan for X amount of dollars or a line of credit or anything revolving so that I can help make payroll for my people? And the banks, I saw them. And the banks would say, no, because they were too afraid or because the underwriting guidelines got too tight. I don't, you could say what you want to. But what ended up happening was that those people couldn't make payroll, so they had to lay off the builders or the construction people, and then mortgages. And then what you have is this ripple effect, like you throw a pebble into a pond, and now the builders start going down. The people with houses that are losing value, especially if they're rental properties or their secondary homes, walk from them first because fuck it, why are they going to sit there and try to fight for a home that is losing value? And then the builders start collapsing. They lay off a whole bunch of people. Then all of the people who, supplied the builders, whether it's, lumber and, hardware, any of that kind of stuff, or just as simple as the food truck that comes to the construction site, all those people are now out of jobs. And then it just ripple effects out. And then what you have is you have the banking system starting to collapse. And this is going to be controversial, but I'm just going to say it. This is a deal. And in 2008, we were told that if three or five of the biggest banks collapsed, there is not enough money in FDIC insured to cover it. Okay, so think about that for 1 second. Now, don't fucking send me emails and be like, Mel, I did research and actually that's not true. I don't give a fuck. Okay, what I'm telling you is this is what we were told. And the bottom line is that if you put your money into a bank, you are there because you want FDIC insurance. Because if you wanted a better return, you would invest in the stock market.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But at that time, the FDIC insured $100,000 was the amount that the FDIC insured. Then they raised it in 2009 to $250,000.
Okay.
But they didn't have enough money in FDIC at the time to cover. If the 3 or 5, I don't remember, and like I said, if you want to send me bullshit emails, do it. I don't really fucking care. If they collapsed, FDIC insurance didn't have enough time. And if you read those FDIC insured pamphlets at the time, I don't know what they say now. I haven't read one lately, but it does not tell you when they have to pay you back. So it could take 30 years to pay you back. And I'm not saying it would, but I'm just saying that if that's the case, and so this is how close we were to the brink in 2008. And I don't know if a lot of people realize that we literally almost went into a Great Depression. And I am not smart enough, nor am I an economist, to be able to point out all the ways that we fixed it, okay? Because there was a lot of Mandarin. There was the Dodd-Frank Act that came out in 2009. The market bottomed officially March 9th of 2009. And by the end of 2009, we had a 26.46% return on the S&P from a negative of 36% the previous year. So we just went we were just up and down crazy. And so we were so close to the brink, and they started putting in a lot of these bank regulations to try to make sure that banks went through suitability testing and all this kind of stuff to make sure that in the event of a 2008 again, that they can stand
Right.
and not go under. Well, now they've been just loosening those. And they just, within the last year, and I think it is under the Trump administration, I don't think it was under Obama, but I'm almost positive it's under Trump administration so far. They loosened a lot of the regulations on Dodd-Frank that came in and regulated the banks after they almost ass fucked us in 2008, which infuriates me. Because as a financial advisor, you want to have your clients trust in what you do, and you want to have your clients trust in the economy, and they just don't give a fuck, and they have started loosening the regulations. And in 2008, my story, I got boned just like everybody else because I said fuck like 4 times, so I'm going to change it up a little bit.
Word,
I'm going to change it up. So for me, I've been licensed since 2005, and I started as a full-time advisor June 28th of 08. So the market,
Big timing.
What a time to start. Wow, your timing's good.
and I was so excited. I was so excited. I was so excited to be an advisor. I had been licensed since 05. I was super gung-ho, and I loved investments. I still love investments. That's why I still do it. And they're like, hey, Mel, and the market had started slowing at the fourth quarter of 2007. And then had continued to slow the first 2 quarters of 2008. And it was volatile, but it hadn't went in the shitter yet. Like, it hadn't became the shit show until, of course, after I started my job. And I was given a little draw, which I immediately burned through. Right. Because I couldn't make any money as an investment advisor. Nobody would talk to me. There's so many stories. I had crazy people coming into my office, and I'm literally in the middle of it. I'm watching everything red on the screen. I'm like, how the fuck am I getting clients? I'm new to this job. The market's going to hell. All of my other financial advisor friends are just blowing up and leaving the industry. And a guy came into my cubicle, and he's like, you know what you need to invest in? And I'm kind of looking at him. First of all, I don't even know who you are. And then he says, you need to invest in tiny diamonds.
Tiny diamonds?
Tiny, and then he does his hand like this. Tiny diamonds. And I said, really, why is that? He said, because that way, when we go back to the barter system, so barter system is where you exchange goods and services without money. Okay. When we go back to the barter system, you'll have something to trade for food. Okay?
Oh my God.
Wow.
And so my response to him was, okay, you have diamonds and I have corn. Whose commodity is worth more? If you're hungry, do you think I give a shit? What are your tiny diamonds worth if everybody is really hungry and I have corn? Because I guarantee you don't have enough diamonds in your little hand, your little tiny hand, to exchange for my corn, because my commodity is going to be worth way more than yours. We had people showing up on the weekend, slamming their fist on the window and just like trying to get anybody, because we'd be there working.
Really?
Yeah, we'd be there working, and after hours, as long as they let us stay, trying to figure out, our clients are freaking out. We're like, what the fuck is going on? Because everywhere you ran, bit it. Bonds, that's where you go when the market goes bad. Fucking bonds went in the shitter. The mortgage-backed securities go in the shitter. Everything, money markets, everything's blowing up. And people are losing their mind. And so I guess maybe because they worked Monday through Friday, Saturday was their only day, and they would be pounding on our window, just freaking out. I would call people and try to talk to them about investments, and they would yell explicits at me and slam the phone down on me. This is 2008, so we didn't have, as much people having iPhones. We just went boop when you hung up on somebody. Like, they would physically slam it down on me. And I went through my draw immediately, and I was a new advisor, and I'm going, what the holy fuck is going on? I had 2 rental properties at the time and a house. And I had renters in both properties, and value just started dropping. But I was like, I'm committed, right? Because I'm like, I borrowed this money, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pay this money. And a lot of financial advisors were in the same exact boat because we're investment advisors. So we invested. We had money in the market. We had money in rental property. That's what you do when you're an advisor. You walk the walk. And my 2 condos, the people I had in it, just were, you know, in one of my condos, they moved back home with their mom. They were millennials.
Right.
They moved back home with their mom because they could. They're just like, hey, we can't, you know, they cut his hours, they cut her hours. We don't have enough money. We're moving back with their parents. I'm like, great. So now I'm stuck with this gorgeous condo. I cannot get rented. I kept dropping the rent. I could not get anybody in it. I don't know if everybody had homes of parents that they could run to, or I don't know what was happening, but I could not get anybody in it. And I'm just pulling off my line of credit. I'm floating this condo. My other condo had renters in it, and they were, you know, kind of in and out. And I later, when I got to the condo, they had stole all of my appliances. And I had a huge refrigerator in there, that one of the nice ones where you pull out the bottom and the freezer's on the bottom.
Oh, right.
And I don't know how the fuck they got it down, because it was a 2nd-story condo and the stairs were narrow. And if you guys are listening, fuck you. Seriously, fuck you for taking my appliances. You guys are pieces of shit. Anyway, I had to say that. I hope you listen. So they stole my fridge. They stole all of my appliances, and my HOA dues got backed up because I didn't have enough money to float. And I'm like this morally, you know, I'm going to pay it. My credit was excellent. I was like, I'm going to pay this. And then what ended up happening was, because I was not getting any money, because I was a commission advisor in 2008, and I did not have a book because I transitioned into the role with no book, June 28th of 08. I was just like paying the HOA when I can. Well, anyway, so I contact both lenders and I say, you know, I want a short sale, because what I finally got to the point was, I was like, if I don't do something, I'm going into BK. Now, it's one thing for a financial advisor to lose rental property. It's another thing for an advisor, in my mind, at the time, to have a BK. And I thought, Mel, if you were your own client, what would you tell yourself? And I would have said, what the fuck are you doing? Get rid of those houses. Fuck them. Walk from them. This is ridiculous. And so I contacted people and I was like, let's do a short sale. So the first one was IndyMac.
Okay.
Yep. And so they did a short sale for me, and, you know, we got out of the house soon. And you know, I only had, I think I had a $10,000 equity line of credit on it that I had consolidated bills, and I paid it. And they, you know, they took that. And then the other condo with the people that stole the appliances, they kept dicking me around, and they kept saying, send in financials. So I'm sending in financials, and they're like, send in financials. And I must have sent in, and you'll hear this a lot about the robo-signing that happened in 2008. I sent in financials, without exaggeration, at least 15 times. And I got a new real estate agent, because I'm like, I need to get out of this house. I'm trying to do the short sale. I don't want it to fuck up my credit even more than it already has. I want to do the right thing. And, you know, I got an email from them saying, hey, send us your financials. I'm like, Jesus Christ, like, I've done. So I'm like, okay. So I get everything together. I send it in. The new realtor's looking at it. The next email that comes in is from her saying, your condo was foreclosed on and sold at auction yesterday.
Oh my God. No way.
And I was like, what the fuck are you talking? I called her and I'm going, what are you saying? She's like, your condo is gone. Like so I'm literally have an email, send us financials, because we're doing your short sale. I had just sent them back in, and of course I had to keep faxing them from work, which is so embarrassing because it's like 30 pages, right? Fax them in, and then no, they skipped over the whole thing, didn't give a shit that I was trying to do a short sale, and they took my condo. I could cry now. It fucking hurt me so bad, because, and the reason why I'm telling you this as a CFP and as a licensed acting financial advisor is because I'm keeping it 100. And that fucked with me so bad that I let one of my properties as a financial advisor go into foreclosure. But there was nothing I could have done about it, because they didn't even let us have a chance. So I had a foreclosure on my record, which is exactly what I was trying not to do. And I had a short sale on my record. And of course, my credit got devastated. And, you know, I rebuilt it. And I I don't know if it's charisma, which is probably charisma. If it's charisma,
sure
or
it is.
if it's or it's the fact that I'm good at what I do, which I do believe that I'm still here. But 2008 was so fucking horrible, and when we bottomed for a financial advisor on commission, we bottomed in March 9th. Nobody knew that was the bottom at the time, right? You don't know it's the bottom until it's a year out.
Right.
And people still wouldn't invest. They still wouldn't invest. And it was just so devastating personally. It was devastating financially. And I realized at that time that corporations run under a different rule. If they have a loan and they don't pay it back, well, they don't pay it back, right? And they write it off.
Right.
Okay, but as a person, if you lend me money, I feel morally like my job is to pay you back. But a company does not give a shit about you as a person. And so I had to adjust and understand that this is the smart financial decision you have to make. And you just have to realize that, you've done everything you could. I ran up an enormous amount of debt trying to float the 2 condos and allowing them to get short sold. And it was just horrible. So and that is the first time I've ever publicly told my story. Because of all the reasons I mentioned before, just the embarrassment of it all and the fact that, you don't ever want to tell your story when you're a financial advisor because you don't want clients to not work with you because they think that you're a bad financial advisor, you know?
Wow.
Yeah, it sucked.
That just shows that it can happen to anyone, So.
Even somebody as smart as me.
Exactly. And even someone as charismatic and smart.
Charismatic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, my gosh. So... the hope is that, leaving 2008 in our dust, that during our lifetimes, at least as the X generation, that we will catch a break and never have to live through another one of those great recessions ever again. So if you're out there and you lived through 2008, you got your ass handed to you, you're not alone. We've shared 3 stories here and all from different aspects. And, get up and talk to a financial advisor and educate yourself and just know that it has nothing to do with you.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's all I have to say about that. You want to add anything, Stormy?
I've got nothing to add. I can't follow that.
I can't follow your depressingly
No, I know.
horrible, devastating story.
I'm going to go home and have a drink.
I know. Let's
Definitely
just
go
have
have some whiskey.
Yeah,
let's all have some
telling you.
whiskey.
And that was before. That was
Yeah.
before all of the investment property fallout happened. That was just literally the day that whiskey day when they didn't approve the TARP bailout. And I landed on Jack Daniel's single barrel. And that's how all of our podcasts should end, is us talking about alcohol and getting fucked up.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Cheers.
All right. Until
Okay.
next time.
Cheers. Talk to you soon.
Cheerio.
Thanks for listening. If you like us, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.